Welcome, everyone, to today's episode 3 of Beyond Boundaries. Today's topic is we're going to talk about NFL quarterbacks. More specifically, each team's quarterback, is it a top 3 player on their roster? And there's a couple different ways you can look at it. How we looked at it is if we were creating Madden today and we had to do the overalls or the rankings, would the quarterback be in the top 3 highest overalls on that roster? So it kind of does eliminate some like good quarterbacks that we see that are good, but their rosters are just so much better around them that they wouldn't be in that top 3 position. So it does kind of make it an interesting topic and an interesting thought. There's a lot less quarterbacks than you would think once you like make out this list. You can do it for yourself, see how many you get. Make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment for any videos ideas that you've had. I've had a couple people text me with some ideas that we should do. Just leave them down in the comments. If we like it, you might see it in the future. But let's get to the video. All right. First team we have up is the Cardinals. This roster is in pretty bad shape. They're definitely uh, switching an era, but I do think Kyler Murray is a top 3 player. I have him listed as the number 2 player on the Cardinals behind Budda Baker. The roster is very thin in terms of talent. They just got Marvin Harrison, who right now I put it as 5, but by halfway through the season, he could be the third best player. They just have a lot to work through, but I think Kyler is going to come back off his injury just fine and still be a very good quarterback.
I would completely agree. Right now, I definitely would. It's hard to know how good he's going to be, but off of the past years, think he's a top player on that team. The only player that's well known on that team really is Budda Baker. Obviously, people know like James Conner, but the value of running backs are kind of lower, so you wouldn't put a running back as high as you would put a quarterback. So I agree with that. I definitely think by the end of the year, Marvin Harrison is going to be one of the top three, top two players on that team, though.
Yeah, definitely. The next team we have is the Falcons. The Falcons just got a new quarterback, Kirk Cousins, and for me, I said he's not a top 3 player on that team. Is he a good quarterback? Yes. Um, but that roster does have a lot of very good pieces. And what was really holding them back last year was that quarterback play. I mean, Ritter did a terrible job. So, will Kirk Cousins come in and do very well? Yes, but I just think there's so many pieces. Like they have Jesse Bates, they have Chris Lindstrom, AJ Terrell, those young guys on the offense for weapons like Pitts and Bijan and London. So I think he's surrounded by a lot of talent. So is he a top 3 player on that team? No, but I still think he's a good quarterback.
I completely agree. There's a lot of young talent on that team with Terrell, Bijan, Pitts, as you named, and then there's the veterans of some of those offensive linemen, some of those defensive linemen, like Lindstrom and Garrett, Grady Jarrett, and then also you still got Jesse Bates, who had a one of his best years last year, so you obviously have to put him up there. And coming off an Achilles at the age of, what is he, 38,
Old.
35?
At this
However
point,
old
it's just old.
he's a very old up. Now, if you're talking about value, I would say he's a top three player right now. But based on talent, I wouldn't put him in the top three as you talked about. And yeah, they just have a lot of young talent that that quarterback position is going to help them. But I think they have a lot of talent around him that I don't think he'd be that top player on that team.
hmm
I think this next one's pretty easy.
Yep, this one's gonna be a quick one. The Ravens and Lamar. He's definitely a top 3 player, even on a stacked roster like that. At first, he was one where I was like, "Is it close?" Because you have someone like Roquan, who's the second best linebacker in football right now. So, is Lamar the second best quarterback? I don't think so. You have someone like Mark Andrews. Is he up there? Um, Kyle Hamilton's on his way up at safety to being one of the best in the league. But in the end, I do think Lamar is just an insane quarterback, so it's hard to say he's not the top three on that roster, no matter how good the roster ends up being.
Definitely agree. You also, you forgot about the kicker love. You got to bring in good old Justin Tucker.
Yep, he was another one where I was like, if we're doing this technically based off overall, Justin Tucker would probably be up there. So I kind of decided to leave him out, but he was going to be one where I was like, ooh, that's kind of hard because he is technically the best kicker in the game. So,
hmm
but yeah.
And they have especially on that defense, there's so many people you could put up there. Marlon Humphrey, Metabike, um, like you talked about Kyle Hamilton,
Hmm.
even like at receiver Zay Flowers. Obviously, I don't think any of those guys are better than Lamar, but they have a very talented roster, and it's just there's a lot of people you could put into that top three, top five.
Hmm. The next one, um, last year, this probably maybe would have been a little bit more difficult, but after the house cleaning they did, I think they really left it no choice. It's literally Josh Allen and a lot of nobody, especially on that offensive side of the ball. The next two players that I would have for that roster would be like Von Miller and Ed Oliver, like a Gregory Rousseau, like those D linemen. But other than that, a lot of that roster was like ripped to shreds in terms of
James Cook.
talents. James Cook is close, but like Stefan's gone. The
hmm
safeties are gone. Tre'Davious is gone. I know he's been hurt the past 2 years, so it's not really a loss. But yeah, I think the Bills roster is really put on Josh Allen's shoulders this year.
I think Kincaid will be one of their best players this year. I think he'll have a really big year,
Hmm.
along with dynasty hopes of James Cook.
Yeah, they're really relying on that young talent to come through and prosper this season. The next one is the Panthers. The Panthers, I'm sure every Panthers fan hope is that Bryce Young is on their top three list. Just going into the season, he's not. Last year, he had a lot of struggles, which you can say was that him or was that just the situation he was in? I think it's a little bit of both. His situation's a little bit better this year. We'll kind of see what that turns into. But going into the season, I just think their top three players are Derek Brown, J.C. Horn, and Deontay Johnson. Which to see Deontay Johnson in that top three as Bryce Young's weapon, I'm sure is exciting because last year his top weapon was Adam Thielen, so now he has Thielen and Deontay. So hopefully they can get a little bit of something going and really show why he was picked so high.
What was that receiver's name they drafted? I like him. I think he's going to be a really good pickup for them, and even could pass Deontay as the number one by the end of the year.
Yeah, it's very likely.
I barely can understand him. I can't remember his name. Leggett?
Yeah, yeah, from South Carolina.
Leggett. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. I don't think there's much to talk about other than that. Yeah, Bryce Young by the end of the with some of these weapons, I think you could argue that he'll be a top three player on the team just because they don't have that much. But right now, what he showcased as a rookie, now all that probably not on him. But those are the only stats we can go based off of right now, and you just can't put him as a top three player on the team.
All right, our next team up is the Bears. Uh, Caleb
This one,
Williams, as excited as everyone is for him, I don't think currently going into the season, I would say he's a top three player on that team. Is if I was going off of like excitement or potential or any of that, I would say yes. But if I was making a roster right now, he would not be the third highest rated player on that team. The Bears have done a very good job of actually giving him something to work with, unlike they did with Fields. I mean, you have Jalen Johnson, he's a stud corner. You have people like DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and then continuing on the defensive side, you bring in Bayard and you brought in Montez Sweat last year, who I think is very underrated. I think he's a really great edge. So I just think they've built that roster so well. Now, after next year or after 2 years, maybe, whatever the case is, could he be elite as everyone hopes? Absolutely. I mean, he could topple this roster just like Lamar does with the Ravens. No matter how good the Bears build, he could just still always be at the top. But right now, I just don't see that being the case.
I completely agree. I think if you ask this question at the end of the year, I think your answer is probably a lot different. With the weapons around him, especially with Komet, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, the receiver they just recently drafted, some of the offensive line help that they've got in the last 2 years. I think he's set up for very good success. And by the end of the year, going into next year, I think your answer is a little bit different for this um, question. And even on defensive side of the ball, like they paid all that money for Tremaine Edmonds. I don't think he had the best year last year, but hopefully he has a bounce back year for him this year, along with that other linebacker they paid from Philly. I can't think of his name right now, but hopefully those two guys are at the top of their roster by this for next year as well to get the best out of the roster that they've created. Along with that safety, Jaquan Brisker, he's one of the
Hmm.
better players on their team as well, who had a pretty solid year this past year, and hopefully he can build on that.
Yeah. All right. Next team up is the Bengals. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, they're the top of that roster. It's Jamar Chase. It's Joe Burrow. It's T Higgins. Um, After that, you could say whatever. Is this the same Bengals? No, they've lost some people. They've added some people though. But I think at that top, it'll for sure be those top two. We'll see what happens with T Higgins, but for sure, the top of the roster for the Bengals will just always be Chase and Burrow.
And I don't think Hendrickson hasn't been traded yet, has he?
No, he's still there.
Yeah.
We'll see
And
what we'll see what
they
he
also
looks
got
like
yeah,
without Reader now.
and Logan Wilson's pretty good linebacker. They got the Michigan Goats, but we're not going to talk about them. DJ Reader left, didn't he?
Yeah.
They
Yep.
lost him. Yeah, those three at the top of that roster are pretty obvious names, I think. Um, you could argue some of the defensive players and the impact over T. Higgins simply because he's a number two. But if you're simply going based off talent, I think T. Higgins has got to be in your top three.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. The Browns. Um. Obviously, I don't think Deshaun Watson's a top three player on this Cleveland team. I think this Cleveland roster is stacked with talent. The key is that talent staying healthy. That's been the issue the past 2 years. Is by the end of the year, it's like a shell of the roster, and then Deshaun Watson getting back to what he was. I mean, at the Texans, he definitely would be on this roster. I think he was insane. And then now with the time off and the injuries, he's kind of struggled. Last year he showed flashes, but then like it was like really good and then really bad and then like really good and then he immediately gets hurt. So it was like, all right, we just need that every game next year and that'll actually then you'll actually be up there. I don't think even if he has a good year next year, I don't think he breaks the top three because this Ross, I mean, you have Myles Garrett, you have Nick Chubb, who's probably the best running back, you have Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, probably two of the best guards, along with like a Zach Martin, and then you have like Denzel Ward, JOK. I just think your roster is really insane. So even if he's good, I don't think he ever breaks his top three as long as this roster stays around.
hmm And also, you got to include Njoku and Amari Cooper in that as well. I
Hmm.
think they're more the top because obviously Amari, there's so many good receivers, so you kind of forget about him, but he's still one of the more top receivers and top tight ends in the league. Um, they also have a lot of talent on defense with Delpit, Newsome, um, those two guys, and is Emerson as well. So they're loaded at every position, like you talked about. So I just don't think, even if he had, obviously he went back to Texans for him, then he had a different discussion. But if he has a solid year, I just don't think he's a top three player on that loaded roster.
Yeah. Really. All right, the Stars, the Cowboys. I know this one we're probably gonna be different on.
Um, I don't think we are.
Okay.
Uh, like I talked about in one of the other teams, I think if you go based on value, Dak is definitely a top three player on the team. But if you're going strictly based off of talent, I just don't think you can simply because of all the high level talents they have at the top of the roster with obviously Micah leading the pack as obviously one of the best defensive players, top two in the league. Zach Martin, a top two guard in the league. CD, a top three, top two receiver in the league. They lost Tyron, which was which would have pushed Dak a little bit higher on the list, but they still have even DeMarcus Lawrence, you could argue, um, is one of the better on defensive linemen in the NFL. Trayvon Diggs coming back from his torn ACL. Deron Bland, obviously everyone knows the year that he had last year. If they bring back Stephon Gilmore, there's just so much talent at the top of that roster that I don't think you could put Dak in the top three. Now, I'm a Dak lover, so um, but I just think the talent at the top of that roster is you just can't put Dak talent wise at the top of that roster. Now, if we talk about Zeke, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think so. I do hate to say it, but I think the Cowboys would kind of be in like the same position as the Browns. Like their roster is so good, but that roster does rely on Deshaun and Dak performing well. Definitely, like they can't be bad and the team will still succeed at the level they want. So in that same sense, I do think Dak has a lot of insane pieces around him, but he does. The team's going to need him to perform like they have in the past and stop choking in the playoffs. That would be nice. Um, yeah, I just think you hit the nail on the head. When you have someone like Micah, Zach Martin, and CD, it's hard to break the top three.
And you also got people like Tyron Smith or Tyler Smith, who is one of the best up and coming guards in the NFL. You got Brandon Cooks, you got Ferguson. There's just so much young talent up and coming on this roster.
Hmm.
I just don't think he'll ever, even at his top, even at his best, I don't think he's a top three player on the roster.
Yeah. All right, the Broncos. The Broncos. I think this is an easy one, whether it is Bo Nix or Zach Wilson starting the year.
What do you
I
mean? You
just,
don't think Zach Wilson's a top player on the team?
I mean, this roster is in rough shape, but I can't put a rookie as a top three player unless like they're on a really bad roster. Um, and I can't put Zach Wilson based on the way he's played in the past, even if he does get with Sean Payton and rejuvenate his career. I definitely can't put him up there right now. Um, and I do think there is some movement in that top three for them. I think Sertan's definitely number one. I think Cortland Sutton's number two. And then that third spot, like you have like someone like Bowles or Martinez, like
Lynchy.
yep, like one of those linemen, like right in that third spot. So if Bo Nix or Zach Wilson comes in and like balls out, I definitely think they could get right into that third spot. Definitely, it's more open than someone for like Caleb Williams to get into that Bears top three first year. I think it's going to be hard because even if he plays well, him playing well means Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and DJ Moore and
Welcome
Swift are
back.
all going to play well. So it's like it's going to be hard for him. Where those other quarterbacks on the Broncos, I think it'll be easy for them to get into that top three spot.
I agree. I forgot we didn't mention Jerry Judy on the Browns.
Yep, he is a new addition. Exciting.
Um, some other people you could mention is like a Javonte Williams. I don't think he's been the same from his ACL, but what is this? This will be year two from it.
Yeah, this
And
this is the
normally
year you're
players,
supposed to bounce back
yeah,
100%. So.
normally players typically come back after this year.
Mhm.
Yeah, this, like you said, this roster is not in the greatest shape because their first round pick was Bo Nix, so it's not even like there's a rookie besides quarterback that you really could talk about as someone that's going to make an impact on the top three. I don't remember their second round pick off the top of my head.
Kind of a quiet off season for the Broncos. Um, our next team is the Lions. Lions, I think this is another situation of great roster, and but a great roster that's gonna need that quarterback to do well, right? You have Amon Ra, You have Hutchinson, you have Sewell, Ragnow. I mean, the entire offensive line pretty much. You have people like Brian Branch last year who balled out, and you hope he gets better. I just think that roster is really good, but it's kind of obvious it's going to rely on Jared Goff continuing to play good football. He doesn't have to be great. He doesn't have to be insane. He just can't be bad, right? Like we've talked about with some of these other quarterbacks. Bad quarterback play is going to ruin any roster. You just need someone to manage the game and make the right decisions, and you'll be fine.
I completely agree. Now, the money that he just got, I think he needs to be a top three player on this roster. But we're not going to get into that discussion. Um, I just don't like even if you looking at this roster, you could push top 10. It'd be tough
Mm-hmm.
with players like Jameer Gibbs, Sam Laporta. I don't think you take them over him. Brian Branch, like you talked about, their entire offensive line, Hutchinson. There's just so many people that you could. I just don't think he's a top player on the roster.
Yeah.
And who did they drafted a good corner, didn't they?
Yep. They Tron Arnold from Alabama. Excuse me. Yeah. So he's up and coming. I've seen clips of him already at practice, playing really well. So Lions fans should be
And
excited for this year, even though um,
it's
Jared
still
Goff
the
may not
Lions.
be the star of the show.
And it's still the Lions.
The Packers. The Packers, even after last year, Jordan Love really turned it around and showed us that he's going to be the Packers starting quarterback moving forward. They did it again. I think they have a great system there, but I don't think that he is a top 3 player. After last year, could he potentially be by the end of this year if he continues on that path of growth that he did last year? But currently going into the year, I would have Jair Alexander, Josh Jacobs, and Kenny Clark above him, and even someone like Elton Jenkins. I know it's hard to say a guard is better than a quarterback when you think like, well, I'd rather lose a guard than a quarterback. But in terms of overall talent, Elton Jenkins is one of the best upcoming guards, along with Tyler Smith. I think they're in that same kind of category. So I have Love at 5 for me.
I agree. I think if he by week 6, week 7, if he plays like he did at the end of last year, I think he sneaks into that top 3. But as of right now, I don't think he can. With also guys like Rashawn Gary, um, their middle linebacker as well, some of their offensive linemen that they've added, some of the receivers that they've added. But like I said, if by like midway through the season, I think if he continues on the growth that he is, he'll be a top 3 player on the team.
Yeah, agree. Texans. The Texans, I think this one might surprise some people. After at the end of last season, I would say 100% absolutely, but after this off season, I have him at 4. I think Laremy Tunsil's still one of the best tackles in the game. I think there's very few that can compete with him for that spot. And then you add in people like Stephon Diggs and Danielle Hunter. I mean, those 3 players are elite at their positions and some of the most important positions. And CJ Stroud coming off only one good year of that. That's kind of why I have him at 4. If he continues to keep doing this, no matter how good Stephon Diggs or Danielle Hunter play, he'll go up in that spot. But I just think based off of the 1 year of performance versus these 3 really big name guys that he now has on his team, I didn't feel like putting him in the top 3.
I agree. I think it's a lot of ways similar to Love. By midseason, I think your answer is different, but you just need to, a couple more games. Obviously, that sophomore slump that everybody talks about. By midseason, I think your answer is a lot different. This roster is very good with different things, as in Schultz from the tight end. They got who knows what Tank Dell will be after his injury, and pretty sure he got shot this offseason as well. So hopefully he comes back healthy from that, along with his other rookie buddy and Will Anderson, Nico Collins. There's a lot of players on this roster that are very good, but I think by midseason, CJ Stroud will be a top 30 player in this league
Yeah,
or the player on this team
yeah,
because arguably he'll be pushing top three, top five quarterback as well.
yeah. Um, our next team in the same division is the Colts. I think the Colts is pretty simple. You have Anthony Richardson get hurt after a couple games last year, so you kind of treat him like these other rookies. You know, you got to see it. You got to see it over an extended period of time. And right now, I think the Colts' big three are JT, Quentin Nelson, and DeForest Buckner. You could even throw in people like Pittman or Zaire Franklin, even. But I just think that those top three are kind of like the centerpieces of that offense right now. And Anthony Richardson just needs to come out, produce, and stay on the field in order to crack that top three.
I agree. Uh, he showed a lot of flashes in those games, but he also got hurt, what, 3 times in a matter of like 4 weeks.
Yep.
It's not a great sign. But like you talk about, there's an obvious Quentin Nelson's the best player on the roster, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, DeForest Buckner. There's different players on this roster that you just got to put above him. Even like a Josh Downs, his one of his weapons. And I think they added, no, they didn't add someone on offense. Who did they draft?
They drafted Latu.
The Philly defensive lineman. Um, and like a Kenny Moore and some of their offensive linemen, you got to put ahead of him right now. But if he can be consistent with some of the flashes that he showed and learn how to slide like RG3 did not, I think he will crack that top three on the roster because it's not. I mean, you can pass Jonathan Taylor into Forrest Buckner. It's
Yeah.
not like they're elite. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's an elite running back, but I don't know. The value of running backs isn't as much as some of the other positions in the NFL.
Yeah. All right. Next up is the Jags. The Jags. Um, I think this is another debatable one. I have Trevor Lawrence in the top three. I actually have him like right at three. I think Josh Allen, the D end. I think he's the best player on the Jags. Then I think it goes to Aluakon, the middle linebacker. I think he's a beast. And then this is where I think I put Trevor Lawrence. I kind of thought about like a Travis Etienne or a Brandon Sheriff, but I just think uh, even though sometimes last year it was kind of ugly, Trevor Lawrence, he didn't look great as promised. And I think everyone kind of hates on him because of the hype that he got right away, and he hasn't like lived up to it immediately. So everyone's like, "Oh, he's trash, he's trash." He actually did play pretty decent, and a Jags roster that really isn't that great. I think it's hard not to put him like right at that three spot. But I could understand if you didn't.
Yeah, I agree. I think strictly based on consistency and talent right now, you probably have an ETN over him, maybe. Even a Christian Kirk's probably on the bubble. Um, as well as like well, some of their one of their two top corners as well. Um, I think he's right on that bubble like you talked about, and some of their offensive linemen are right there as well. So based off consistency, I think you could argue that Trevor's probably not top three, but based off of talent and um, on that roster, you could definitely argue Trevor's top three. And I think by midseason, I think this year he'll have a really good year, and he'll pop into that number one, number two spot as well.
Yeah, I honestly think that I think his big thing will be is if I really think they should move on from Doug Peterson and get someone like the Lions OC, like really someone at that head coach spot that is going to build an offense for Trevor to succeed. Um I don't think Doug Peterson's a bad coach. I think he's like we kind of talked like I talked about in the last episode. I think he's an average coach and he's gotten the Jags to this point, but I think to take the Jags over the hump and to take Trevor Lawrence where he needs to go, I just think he needs like that offensive mind, right? We talk about like a Patrick Mahomes with an Andy Reid. We talk about Lamar with his running style OCs. A lot of these top quarterbacks have that guy that they can really rely to build the offense and call the offense perfectly for them. And I'm not sure if the Jags have that. And I think that's part of the consistency issue, definitely.
And also, I think and them adding what's his name, Brian Thomas or whatever.
Yep.
I think he's legit going to be a number one. Where I don't think Christian Kirk or Calvin really have been number one legit receivers. So I think adding a receiver that's going to be a legit number one that he's going to be able to grow with is going to be important. Obviously, he's got like Evan Ingram, but having that stud receiver, which I think Brian Thomas will be, is going to help him as well. And I think they added a small piece. I think Gabe Davis is it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a small piece as well.
All right. Next up, the Chiefs. I think this one is pretty obvious and doesn't need much talking. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones. Those are the top three. Patrick Mahomes is at the top of every list you can make. I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Completely agree. I think you could argue some of those offensive linemen or Trent McDuffie for um Travis or Chris Jones here in the near future strictly because of age. But obviously right now those are the three headers.
Yep. Yep. There are definitely some players creeping into those top three, especially if Chris Jones doesn't plan to stick around much longer. And there's been rumors that Travis Kelce might retire after this year or once kind of this run's over. So who knows how long that'll last.
But we'll
The
always know the
Raiders.
curly haired goblin will be at the top.
Raiders. The Raiders starting quarterback is Gardner Minshew. So I think it's pretty obvious that he's not a top three player on that roster. That roster is not in a great spot, but they do have a couple really big pieces that are very important, right? You have a Max Crosby, you have Devontae Adams, and you have Colton Miller. I, three of the most important or some of the most important positions in football outside of quarterback are edge rusher, left tackle, and wide receiver. And they do have those three pieces, so I'll give the Raiders that. And that's their top three. I think they're building the roster in the right way. I think Antonio Pierce is in the right direction. He's just got to get his quarterback now. I think Gardner Minshew will do decent this year, but he's obviously not your franchise guy.
I agree. I don't think there's much else to really discuss in that aspect.
Chargers. Chargers. I say that Justin Herbert is in the top three. I have him at two. I have Derwin James. I think Derwin James is, I would say he's probably the best safety in the league. Has he had some injury issues? Yes, but when he is playing, he is by far the best. So then that puts Justin Herbert at two, and then you have people behind him like a Rashawn Slater, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. Those guys are kind of right there behind him, but I think those top two players are Derwin James and Justin Herbert on that roster.
I completely agree. And one person I think that'll creep into that top five, top three zone by the end of the year would be Joe Alt. The lineman that they drafted is going to be a stud. And obviously, the new coach, they're going to want to run the ball. So he's going to get a lot of look at how talented he actually is. So I think some of those offensive linemen are going to argue into that top three, top five area, but I just don't think you can argue with Derwin or Justin Herbert creeping anyone creeping above those two.
Yeah. Next up, the other LA team, the Rams. Um, I could potentially see you maybe having a different one here. I have Stafford in the top three. I actually have him at number two. I think Cooper Kupp is still that top receiver on that team. He had some injury issues last year, which kind of threw off the sync up. And then, I mean, he was drawing the attention, so Puka was just kind of feasting. I think that'll balance out a little bit more this year now that people definitely have to respect both of them. Um, but I think Stafford's kind of the key to all of that, right? You can't. It's hard to feed two mouths without an elite quarterback to do it. So I think Stafford's at that two, Puka's at that three, and then the two corners are my next two. I think Tre'Davious White, if he can stay on the field, he's a beast, uh, definitely in that defense. And then Darius Williams, that number two corner. I think they're both going to be really good.
Didn't they lose Darius Williams?
Um, I thought he stayed around. Maybe they did.
I thought he went to the Jags.
Are you looking at it?
Trying to look it up right now. Nope, he is on the Rams. Some reason I thought he went to the Jags. Um, I think the only thing I would say is like Puka over a cup simply because age is catching up to him. I think, as you can see, the injuries. Obviously, he could come back and he's still one of the better receivers, and he's obviously going to bounce back a little better this year. But even when Cup played, I think Puka was the number one, whether that is because Cup was still hurt or not. I just think with age and youth, and Puka's going to take over that number one this year. And I would agree with Stafford being in that top three simply because I don't think this roster has like that elite talent at the top. Well, obviously losing Aaron Donald, he would have been the clear-cut number one of that roster, but losing him, I just don't think there's a lot of good players on that team, but I don't think there's that elite talent at the top that you could put above Stafford. I think Kyron Williams is, I would say he would, based off of talent beat right now with Stafford's age, I would say you'd put Kyron Williams above him, but them drafting Blake Corum so high, I think that's going to be more of a split backfield, and he's going to lose some carries. So I think that's going to lower him a little bit in the talent that and value that he has to this team. So I think right now you have to put Stafford in that top three simply because I just don't think they have that elite talent at the top.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see next year how defenses approach the wide receivers. Um, who do they feel is a bigger threat, and what do they think is their solution? Right, like teams that match up and follow. Are they going to follow Cooper? Are they going to follow Puka? I think that'll be a kind of a real tell around the league in terms of how these two wide receivers are viewed. Do they view Cup still as that number one threat and just kind of live with trying to slow down Puka, or are they going to start taking Puka away and just kind of hoping that Cup is falling off? It'll be kind of interesting to see. I think that'll definitely be a cool dynamic to watch out for this season. And now we have the Dolphins. The Dolphins is another one of these rosters that is stacked. I think Tua is a good quarterback. I think he's kind of perfect for that system. But that roster around him, man, it's insane. You have people like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Ramsey. You bring in um, Armstead. You have someone like Javon Holland on the way up at safety. You bring in someone like Jordan Poyer, Jalen Waddle. I would kind of have all those guys before I have Tua. I just think they're all top players at their positions, and I think that if I was to make a list of each position, I could see all of them. Like I could see a case for all of them being in the top five in some aspect of their positions, where I don't see Tua being a top five quarterback, and that's kind of why I have him down there.
I agree. I just realized we forgot to mention Christian Wilkins for the Raiders.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now that you say that, he'd be another piece. Um, I don't know if I'd put him in that top three though. I think that top three is kind of
Hmm.
big, but yeah, he would definitely be that
Um,
fourth player.
I agree with you with the Dolphins. I think Tua is a very good quarterback, especially in that Daniel's system. I think he's a perfect fit for the offense that they run with his decision making and his accuracies. One of the better quarterbacks in that aspect. But with the talent that they have with Ramsey, Tyreek, if Armstead can actually stay healthy and actually play football this year, Javon Holland, Waddle. I think Waddle's a bona fide number one on a lot of teams in the NFL. Um, and then you got also guys like Jalen Phillips. Before his injury, I think he was an elite pass rusher and turning into an elite pass rusher. And then you got the Swiss Army knife of like Devon Achane. There's just so many people that are skillful on that roster. Obviously, Tua is one of the better players on that roster, but there's still a lot of people that on that roster that I just don't think you can put into that top three for sure. I don't even think you could sneak him into the top five. I think top eight, top 10 is where he's top 10, top eight for sure is where he's sitting right now.
Mm-hmm. Now we have the Vikings. The
I think we're going to
Vikings,
disagree on this one.
probably. The Vikings is another. I mean, it's either going to be Sam Darnold if they're trying to like protect JJ, but I'm just going to go with the assumption that JJ is the starter. I think it makes the most sense.
Long term.
Yep, and in that case, I'm just not putting a rookie in the top three of a roster right now, especially when the Vikings aren't that bad of a roster. I think they have a couple holes, but I do think they have some really good top end talent. I mean, you're talking about JJ, the best wide receiver probably in the NFL right now. You're talking about Hawkinson, who's pushing for that best tight end. I don't think anyone will pass like a Kittle or Travis or Andrews really, but Hawkinson's definitely like one of those young guys trying to push those old guys out at the top of the tight end position. And then Darisaw, the left tackle, I think he's kind of a stud. I was kind of surprised that he kind of burst onto the scene and he's playing as well as he is. But I would definitely say those are kind of those top three. And then even people like Harrison Smith, I think he's still really good. He's not as good as he once was. He's definitely getting older, but I still think he's a huge part of that team over coming into an offseason where you just drafted a rookie and saying that rookie's better than those guys. It's hard to say. Maybe by the end of the year, if JJ plays insane, he could definitely get in there, but hard to say off the rip.
Who's that guy they signed from Houston? I can't think of his name.
Um,
I
the
can't
end?
think of his name, but what?
Yeah, the end? No,
Yeah.
who they say?
Yeah, I can't think of his name. But him, as you talked about Darius, so hopefully Hawkinson comes back, and I think he will with because he doesn't strictly rely on like athleticism like some other guys. So I think he'll come back as just as well as he was. People like Jordan Addison, you got the defensive end that they drafted this year, even you got a lot of people on this roster that I just don't think, even if JJ plays well, that he's going to sneak into the top three for sure. Top five is going to be tough, even. And I think by the end of the year, you could see top 10 if he plays well, but it's this roster's got a lot of talent. So I don't think you can't argue a rookie being there right now, but I just don't even think by the end of the year, even if he plays well, that
Yeah.
he's going to be a top player on this roster because I don't think he's even going to get the start till midway to the end of the season, even if he plays at all.
hmm Yeah, I think
And
the
even players like
Vikings.
Josh Metellus, and he had a very good year playing frickin' defensive line, safety, corner, linebacker,
Yeah,
played everything.
the Vikings have a very experienced roster at the top end of it. So I think it's hard to have one of those young guys really break that experience without being like head and shoulders better than the rest of these guys. I mean, someone we haven't even mentioned is like Aaron Jones coming over from the Packers. He's a great
Oh
running
yeah,
back, and the Vikings, especially if you have a rookie quarterback, are going to lean on that running back. So for an offense that's going to kind of lean on JJ, lean on Hawkinson and Jones, it's hard to put JJ above those guys. Maybe in the future, but definitely on that year one, I think they're he's going to rely on those other guys more than those other guys are going to be reliant on him. The next team we have is the Patriots. The Patriots is an ugly roster, and whether you're either doing this with like Drake May or you're doing it with Brissett, I think Jacoby Brissett's going to start. I think um, I don't see a world really where May starts off the year. Maybe by halfway through he comes in, but I think it is going to be Jacoby, and even with Jacoby, I think the Patriots have enough talent to keep him out of that top three, right? You have Judon, definitely the best player on the Patriots, and then you have people like their safeties. They have like Kyle Duggar, they have Peppers, who's kind of come into his own, and then they have a couple great offensive linemen. You have Stevenson at running back. You have Christian Gomez, who played really well and then got hurt, so you hope that he returns to that same level. Um, I just think a lot of the Patriots' talent is going to be on that defensive side of the ball, at least until Drake May gets his feet under him, gets a little bit better mechanically, and just kind of finds his way into the NFL. Then maybe we can have a conversation. But I think to start this year, definitely, and probably by the end of the year, I think it will stay with those defensive guys sitting at the top of this roster.
What did they? Because they had two first round picks this year, or they only had one.
Um, they only had the one, but then they turned around and drafted the wide receiver.
Yeah, yeah, I remember what you're talking about. But I agree. It's like we've talked about. You can't really put a rookie in there, and like even though this roster is not elite, they still have enough talent at the top with Peppers, Judon, some of those offensive linemen that they have. Christian Gonzalez. Hopefully, he can stay healthy this year. Um, there's just enough talent at the top that I don't think Drake May is. Even if he gets enough reps, he's not going to crack the top of this roster.
No, no. Next one is the Saints. Um, I think the Saints one is kind of obvious. I don't think Derek Carr is as bad as a quarterback as people give him hate for. I think everyone kind of dumps on him, even though he's not that bad of a quarterback. He definitely has his moments. Um, from the moment he broke his ankle, he did kind of like start declining. I think that was kind of the downfall after that peak, but he's still a decent quarterback. But as much as the Saints roster is kind of in a really weird spot, they do have talent, right? You have a Demario Davis, you have a Marshawn Lattimore, a Ryan Ramczyk, Cameron Jordan, a young guy like Chris Olave. You have those older guys who probably aren't at their peak anymore, but they're still very good players. And then you have people like a Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara, even I didn't mention. Those guys, Tyron Matthew, on the way up, or, and again, an older guy that's not at their peak, but still a very good player. So, as much as
Didn't they
Derek
draft
Carr,
Bowers?
what was that?
Didn't they draft Brock Bowers
Yep,
too?
they have someone like Brock Bowers now. So, I think, oh no, the Raiders have Brock Bowers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, the Saints drafted an offensive.
Okay, yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't, I just want to say that I don't think Derek Carr is as bad as a quarterback as everyone said. I think he's a lot closer to this, like top 10 maybe than some people would like to say. I'm sure a lot of people think he's like the bottom tier of the roster. That I just don't see that being the case.
I agree. I don't think there's. I mean, there's enough talent like you talked about that. I don't think he's a top five player on the roster, but I mean, I don't think he's as bad as people think. I think there's Chris Olave. Hopefully, he's been hurt the last few years, so him staying healthy and him um, becoming that number one receiver like they hoped can help. Alvin Kamara is getting older, but hopefully he's stays healthy this year and can help as well. And I think they should have a better team than they had last year due to injuries and some of the age. But I don't think Derek Carr is a top player on this roster, but I don't think he's the bottom player on the roster as well.
The New York Giants.
Danny
I
Dot.
I probably don't have the same top three as other people in terms of this roster. Daniel Jones is definitely not in that top three. Um, I just think I don't know, the case is out on Daniel Jones. I think this is kind of you either got to prove you're an NFL starting quarterback or he's going to be out the league after this. I don't. It's been a rough ride for them Giants fans, but I do think your top three is a very good top three. I think it's all those defensive linemen. I think it's Dexter. I think it's Burns. I think it's Kayvon. Um, I think that is going to be the heartbeat of this team with Saquon gone now, with Daniel Jones' struggle last year. Um, those three are just going to kind of have to carry this roster and just be a dominant force. I don't know if there's a better D line than those three. I think that's a as a Giants fan, you should be happy about that. That is some scary stuff.
And you also got to implement some of those offensive linemen like Andrew Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
um, those guys as well. I think if what's his name, the LSU receiver has a year as a rookie year like Jamar Chase, I think he's pushing into that top three, top two, or top five. Um, so I just obviously I don't think Daniel Jones is the long term answer, but he's not horrible. I just don't think he'll ever be kept pushing in that top five with those guys. Hopefully Thibodeau's able to build off of his rookie year. Last year he was kind of quiet, but hopefully he's able to Wait, last year was his rookie year, wasn't it? Or it was the year before?
No, last year was his rookie.
Okay. Last year he was kind of quiet towards the end of the year. So hopefully he can build and become the dominant pass rusher they drafted him for. Hopefully not, but hopefully for him he can.
The next team, the Jets. Um, I don't know, just kind of along the same lines of like when we talked about Kirk Cousins, an old quarterback coming off this Achilles injury. I think that a healthy Aaron Rodgers at 100% of what he was, I I would say he's probably a top 3 player on this roster, even though this is a pretty decent roster. But I just have concerns coming off an injury like that at that age, and I do think that the coaching staff is going to have those same concerns. I think they're going to rely more on Brees Hall, more on that defense, at least to start the year and kind of get him going, get him comfortable, and then maybe by the end of the year he's back to old Aaron Rodgers and he's a top 3 player. But at the start of the season, I would say that it's probably Sauce, Quinnen Williams, and then Tyron Smith. Tyron Smith, when he plays, he's a beast, but when he plays, I think that's his biggest issue. Is he is either on the field and he's amazing, or he's going to be on the bench for the next 5 weeks. So he's at that third spot, but you could see him get injured in week 2, and then he could definitely be right out of there.
I agree. I think um, even if Rodgers has a good year, which I think he will, I don't think he's cracking top 2. I don't think he's ever again becoming better than Sauce, who's arguably the best corner in the league, arguably one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league. I don't think he's ever becoming that talented because of age and coming back from his Achilles. But I think he could sneak in that top 3. I love Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to become that bona fide number 1 and one of the top receivers in the NFL. But obviously, your quarterback could break into that number 3. But I think top 5 is kind of where he'd fall into if he comes back healthy, with a Tyron Smith being in there as well. If he's obviously he's going to miss time, so it's hard to put him into that top 5. He's not going to be healthy all year. You can just guarantee that. Um,
Yeah.
so like a Garrett Wilson, a Brees Hall, a DJ Reed. There's a lot of talent on this roster, especially the high end talent on the roster. And I just don't think Rodgers will be able to crack that top 3, even if he has a good year. Now, if he's MVP Aaron Rodgers from his Green Bay days, now maybe.
Yeah. All right, the Eagles. You're gonna love this conversation. The
He's a top
Eagles.
35 player.
I have Jalen Hurts at number 4 on this roster. I think the top 3 are Saquon Barkley, Lane Johnson, and AJ Brown. Um, as I say those names, I do have Saquon at first, but I think I would probably in this moment put Lane Johnson as the number 1, Saquon as the number 2, and then AJ Brown as the number 3. I could even see like a Devontae Smith or a Dallas Goddard or the left tackle they have, a
Mulatto.
Mulata. Yep, there you go. Uh, I do think this
The guard
roster
they
is.
just paid.
I think this roster is very good. I know Brevin hates on Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts does what he's supposed to very well. Um, he kind of struggles in the pocket, footwork wise, and his pocket presence isn't the greatest. He doesn't seem the most comfortable in those situations, and it kind of affects some game time moments. But I think he's really good. My concern for that team is the loss of Shane Steichen. I think Shane Steichen's offense was built perfectly for Jalen Hurts, and we kind of saw that last year where their new OC could not recreate that, and they really struggled. So I think finding the balance in that and refining that system that fits Jalen Hurts perfectly is going to be a big key for the Eagles. It's one of my concerns when we talked about coaches, about these coaches that are like these motivating guys that don't have a focus on one side of the ball or the other, that they're really like these glue guys, motivation, culture people. When you lose those coordinators, it can kind of send your team into a spiral. And I think they kind of faced that last year. Um, So hopefully they can kind of bounce back and rediscover that offense for Jalen. I think that's the biggest thing is finding an offense that fits him the best.
Um, I think this roster's got a lot of talent for sure. So I'm not the biggest Jalen Hurts fan, but obviously his worth to the team is high, and he has a skill set that works in the system that they use. But I don't think you can argue that he's top three for sure. I would push him even lower than that with like players like Mulata, like you talked about, Landon Dickerson, that they just made that big contract. Two of the better offensive linemen in the league, Devontae Smith. I think if he's on another team, he's a number one for sure. Um, Also, players like Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, I think I want to say his name is, that they just signed. Players like that, you could, talent wise and at their position, you could argue Jalen Carter, I think, is going to have another elite year. He started really hot, but I think he cooled off. So I think he'll pick it back up this year. And there's just so much talent at the top of this roster. I think Jalen Hurts is more of a top eight player on this roster. Um, you could even like Darius Slay. I think he's fallen off, but he's still one of the better players on this roster um, as well. And then they just drafted the number one corner in the draft, the number three corner in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of talent on this roster, and um, I just don't think you could put Jalen Hurts in top three, top five as well.
Next team is the Steelers. The Steelers. This is going to be a quick one. Whether it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson by the end of the year, those two will never touch the top of this roster right now. I think it's pretty bona fide on the defense. PJ, Minka, and Hayward. And then once Hayward retires, that third person I think is going to be Alex Highsmith. I think the best players on the Steelers will probably always be this defense moving forward. Until something changes, I think those top two will always be the same, and then it'll kind of be a battle for that third spot. But I like Alex Highsmith. I always did when he was in the draft. I was hoping the Browns would pick him. I thought he was kind of a sleeper pick, and now he's in the Steelers balling out, so that's unfortunate to see. But yeah, I think the defense is always going to be the top of this roster.
I agree. You could also add some people like on the offense, like George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, some players like that. I don't think you could put Najee Harris up there that high simply because of the split that they have, and I don't think he is ever going to be the running back that he was the first half of his rookie season. But he's obviously still a good starting running back in the NFL. Um, but like you said, those top two for sure. I don't know what's going on with Hayward. You've seen reports that he's sitting out of camp at age 34, wanting to get a new contract. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. But definitely top two. He's the are secure. And
I mean, you even have a
those,
newcomer like Patrick Queen, a linebacker.
oh yeah, I forgot they got him.
Yeah,
Um,
or like a Joey Porter. I mean, as a rookie corner last year, he was probably one of the better rookie corners last year. I think this team has future potential, and it's everywhere but quarterback right now. Um,
mhm.
yeah, I think
I
they're
think
in an
Justin
interesting
Fields could
situation.
eventually be a good starting quarterback, but I don't ever think he's gonna
It
be
just
able to be a
depends
top
on.
top three player on a roster.
I think it really depends on how fast they go to Justin Fields, right? Like if you make him sit like this year, and say he
Then
sits
they gotta
again
pay him,
next
don't they?
year.
They can't,
Um,
doesn't I think they declined his fifth year.
yeah, but he could potentially end up having to go to another team and sitting. Like I think the clock is winding down for Justin Fields to really maximize his career. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of that.
I think Russ will probably be the starter for the majority. I think he had a pretty solid year this past year. I don't think he was as much to a fault as everyone accused him of. So I think he'll have a solid year.
Especially in
Fields.
Arthur Smith's offense. I think that is a
Mhm.
very quarterback friendly offense.
Yep.
Our next team is the 49ers. This is probably the easiest no of them all when you have people like CMC, Trent Williams, George Kittle, Joey Bosa. Fred Warner. I mean, the
Nick
list kind of
Bosa.
keeps going on. It's even if Brock Purdy keeps makes every Super Bowl, whether he wins it or not, for like the next 5 years, as long as this roster's the same, I don't think he breaks that top five. I think those top five guys are either the best or the second best in their positions. And I don't think Brock Purdy ever breaks that. I think Brock Purdy's a good quarterback. I know Brevin doesn't think that. Brevin thinks he gets carried, which he can kind of talk about. But in terms of top three players on the 49ers roster, he is not it.
I definitely agree. And you've even guys like Truvarius Ward had a really good year last year. Hufanga had a really good rookie year, but then obviously got hurt. Um, who I think their number one receiver, Brandon Ayuk. Who knows what they do with him? But as of right now, he's one of the best. He's the top player on that roster. Then you go to even Dre Greenlaw, Javon Hargraves. There's just so much talent on this roster, and I think Purdy's a good quarterback for the system that he's in. You can't knock him for that, and he makes all the right reads. But as well as talent, I don't think Purdy ever, especially on this roster, but a lot of rosters in the NFL, he's going to be a top three quarterback on or top three player on the roster.
Our next team is the Seahawks. The Seahawks have Geno Smith. I think Geno Smith is kind of the bottom tier of these quarterbacks that um, they're not terrible, but they're definitely not top three worthy of their roster. I think the Seahawks roster is DK, Woolen, and Kenneth Walker. Right? I think they have some other really good pieces on this team, but I don't think Geno is one of those pieces. I think he's just gonna be responsible for steering the boat the best that he can. I don't think this roster is in a competing shape, and I kind of hope that McDonald sees it that same way and kind of goes into sort of a rebuild mode and kind of builds the roster his way and properly. But if they're gonna try and make a push, I don't see Geno being the head of that very well. Kind of, I think he's the middest of mid quarterbacks probably. I think he's right there in that category.
I agree. The only thing I would say was like um, Witherspoon. I think he's a better overall corner than Woolen. I think Woolen had a really good start to his career, and then it kind of dropped off from there with the interceptions falling off a little bit. I don't. I think he's a good quarterback still, but I think Witherspoon overall is going to be better than him for sure. The other two are obvious. DK, K9, I think, um, and Jigba, Jackson Smith and Jigba will become one of the top five players on this roster. They got Leonard Williams. They just drafted another defensive lineman that's pretty good. They have some of these offensive linemen with their two tackles, Charles Cross and I can't remember the other one's name off the top of my head. Lucas, Abraham Lucas. So I don't think obviously Geno's not going to be a top player on this roster, but hopefully they are able to bring someone in because this roster does have a lot of talent and in that division there's a lot of talent. So um, they definitely need to find that quarterback.
Our next team is the Bucks. Baker's another quarterback that I think he isn't as bad as people want to say, especially because he got a lot of hate just for his time in Cleveland. Everybody loves to hate on Cleveland, so that was kind of the reflection of that. But he is not a top three player on this roster. My top three would be Mike Evans, Tristan Wirfs, and Vita Vea. But you even have people like a Levante David. You have a Chris Godwin if you like him more than uh, Mike Evans. You have the Winfield, the safety. So I do think they have a lot of good pieces there, but I would say those top three for me are kind of solidified. They're some of the best at their positions, and I think they'll stay at that top spots.
I completely agree. I don't think there's really much else to discuss on that team as well.
The Titans, their starting quarterback is going to be Will Levis, and this is a team where I could maybe see him breaking that top three. I think the top of this roster is pretty set with Snead and Simmons up there. And then that top three, that third spot is kind of up in the air. Is Calvin Ridley going to be the number one? Is Hopkins going to be the number one? Is Tony Pollard going to be a beast? I think there's a lot up in the air with this Titans roster outside of those top two guys. All right, our last team is the Commanders. Commanders, I would say, is probably the most open roster in the entire NFL in terms of the possibility of Jayden Daniels getting into this top three. Right now, I would say it's Scary Terry, Jonathan Allen, and then that third spot. I had to put someone there, so I put Cosme, the lineman, and that's kind of why I think Jayden Daniels can get there, is because that third spot is really iffy, and even Jonathan Allen at that second spot. If Daniels comes in and balls out and plays really well his rookie year, I think he easily get past Jonathan Allen, because I think Jonathan Allen is on his way down instead of up. So that could be something to be interested in. I think Scary is going to kind of stay at that top player, at least for this year, mainly because he's going to be a key piece to Jayden Daniels succeeding. So if Daniels is going to succeed, then Scary is going to eat, and so I think that kind of keeps him at the number one even by the end of the season. So that has been all 32 teams and a look at their quarterback and kind of roster situations. Let us know, was there a quarterback that you thought we were very wrong on, or maybe a roster kind of in general, right? Like, we went through a lot of our top threes, top five for a lot of these rosters. So let us know, was there something you disagreed with? And like I said at the beginning, if there's a video idea that you want us to do, just leave it in the comments and we'll look at them. We'll kind of write down some of the ones we like. We do have a couple of video ideas coming up, so it may be a couple episodes. But yeah, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, leave those comments, and share this channel with anyone who you think would be interested.